Hello friends! Today is going to be my March TBR. I'm going to be kind of participating in the Spring into Reading-Athon, which is the next session of Season-Athon. It is supposed to be a 1-week readathon, but those really just don't work for me. So instead, I'm just using the prompts for the readathon to help me choose the books I'm going to be reading throughout the month. You might hear some cars going by. I have the door open. The dogs are out there laying in the sun because it feels so good. But I have the door open so they don't get in mind of running away. There are 5 prompts which I have distributed over 4 books. The first prompt is spring cleaning. Read a book that's been collecting dust on your shelves. I probably could have just chosen any book that I have because I've had them all for a little while. But I chose the book that I've had the longest, and that is Lucky You by Erika Carter. This is a story about 3 co-workers and one of their boyfriends who decide to spend an entire year together in an off-grid cabin in the middle of nowhere. All 3 of them are unhappy in their lives in some way, and they all have kind of unhealthy, air quote there on unhealthy, depending on your views on things, but they have ways of dealing with their unhappiness that may not be the best for them in the long run. And so they are all spending this time in the cabin together to try and work through those issues, I guess, learn from them, learn new ways of coping. Now, I'm actually pretty hesitant about reading this book because it is the very last book that I have left from when I had the Book of the Month Club subscription. And if you saw my unhaul, you'll notice that the most of the books that I got rid of were books from Book of the Month. The very first 2 books I ever got from this subscription, I absolutely loved, and I was so excited to keep reading because I loved the first 2 so much. But those have been the only 2 books that I've actually thoroughly enjoyed from that subscription. So I am kind of hesitant to read it just because of past trends with these books, but it also doesn't have great reviews on Goodreads, so that also makes me hesitant to read it, but I'm going to give it a go, and if I don't like it, I can always just put it down, right? The next prompt is Luck of the Irish. Read a book with green on the cover, and it turns out I actually have a lot of books with green on the cover. So this one wasn't as easy for me to pick because I had so many options, but I decided to go with Everlost by Neal Shusterman. This is a random book, another random book that I bought not really knowing anything about it. I originally went looking for another Neal Shusterman book. They didn't have it. This is the only one of his that they had, so I decided just to give it a try and see if I even like his writing. So as far as I know, this book is kind of like a dark, creepy version of Neverland. So it follows 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, who get into a car accident, but they don't fully die. They kind of go into the in-between world called the Everlost. So they're not fully dead, but they're not alive. And it turns out that there are many people in Everlost, many children. There are bands of children living in the Everlost, and they are run by a queen. And the 2 siblings have opposing ideas of Everlost. One wants to stay there permanently live there, if living, I guess you can call it that. But one wants to stay there and the other one does not. And so the sister decides to try her hand at haunting the living world. I'm not sure where that's going to go. So I'm excited to read it. It sounds very interesting. I haven't really heard anybody talk about this book, so hopefully I like it. The next prompt is Over the Rainbow. Read a classic or a retelling. So I am on the waiting list, my library, for the second book to A Curse to Dark and Lonely, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but it's unlikely that I'm going to get that this month. So just in case I don't, I'm going to pull in a classic because I have one classic left in my collection, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. As far as classics go, I do tend to enjoy the more dystopian type classics, which is exactly what this is. So I'm hoping that I also enjoy this one. And then the last two prompts are going to cover a single book, and they are Women's March, read a book with a strong female character, and Spring Break Bash, which is to read the group book or buddy read a book. So I'm actually currently buddy reading an entire series. It's called the Bargainer series. And so I have the last book left in that series that I will be buddy reading, and that is Dark Harmony by Laura Thalassa. This is an adult fantasy romance series, and it follows the Bargainer, who is a fairy king in the other world, but has sort of a side gig here on Earth where he comes to Earth and he strikes deals or bargains with not so great people. Typically, they're usually criminals of some kind, so he helps them cover up their crimes and clean up their messes, things like that. But of course, fairies always have a price to their magic, and so when you strike a deal with the Bargainer, he expects repayment, and he can force you to do anything that he wants, and it's typically not anything pleasant. And he has made a name for himself on Earth by being quite cruel and brutal in his repayment systems. That is until he comes across Callie, who is a 16-year-old siren who has gotten herself into a bit of trouble and has called upon the Bargainer to help clean it up. Typically, the Bargainer will only allow his clients one deal, but that is not the case with Callie. Over the course of a year, Callie strikes hundreds of deals with the Bargainer, and he never asks for repayment. That is until 7 years later when he mysteriously reappears in her life, demanding that repayment begin. So there is a content warning for this one, a trigger warning, and that is of sexual abuse, both of children and adults. Now, it's not ever described in any detail, but it is a major a major aspect of the entire series. So it is brought up several times throughout every book in the series, and the last one is no exception. I have already started reading it. I'm about halfway through. So do keep that in mind if this sounds interesting to you. And that covers all of the prompts for the Read-Athon, but I do need to pull in a nonfiction. And for that one, I've chosen The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. This is sort of his classic book everybody knows him best for. And it's a little dated. I think it came out in maybe the late 80s, somewhere around in there. And it takes our idea of genes being the things that, of course, create us, right? Gives us our characteristics and things. And we use them to reproduce, to make children of our own. But this book kind of flips that idea and turns it around and looks at it as the genes are the ones that are wanting is a bad word to use for this, but wanting to reproduce themselves, and we are kind of their vehicle for doing that. So it sort of does a flip, and it kind of makes us think differently on genetics in general, and of course, evolution. And so I'm pretty excited to read this one. And that's it. Those are the 5 books I plan on reading this month. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of them, but I'm going to try. And I thank you so much for being here, and I hope that means I see you soon.